Oh, you know what? I didn't pull up Facebook. I'll pull that up real quick so I can watch questions there too.
All right. Hi, guys. Good morning. Glad to see you guys rolling in.
Good morning, everybody.
So hi to those of us joining us on Zoom. We will wait a few minutes for our attendees to roll in. Those of you with us on Zoom, note that you can use the chat to feed in comments and greetings and questions. We also have the Q&A feature going in our Zoom webinar today, so you could use that to post your questions as well. During the conversation, Christy and I will keep an eye on that chat and on the Q&A and feed those into the conversation as appropriate. And as always, you can let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from, because as we were talking about with our exceptional panelists today, how fun it is to see our guests attend from all over the country. So welcome and good morning. And if
even though we're virtual, it's still nice to see some familiar faces. It always brightens my day. So thank you.
And if you're joining us on Facebook, we will keep an eye there as well. This video will live there. So if you're not catching us in real time, go ahead and share your comments, but questions will probably have to wait. So we're so glad you're with us regardless of format, and happy to join you in this virtual world. All right. What do you think, Christy? Should we go ahead and get rolling?
I think we should. We can catch anybody who comes in late and they'll be caught up to speed. So I'll go first. My name is Christy Wodick and I'm the Education and Outreach Director in our Traverse City location. So I want to say thank you to everybody for coming today. Hopefully you have a cup of coffee or some warm tea. I know for Northern Michigan, we've had some really beautiful days. And even though rain is predicted, it's still looking pretty darn nice outside. So thanks for stopping in.
All right, thanks, Christy. And hi, everybody. I'm Liz Erlewine, the Visual Arts Director for Crooked Tree Art Center. I am based here in Petoskey. I'm joining you actually from our Bonfield Gallery. We are getting ready to open an exhibit on Monday, April 19th. So hopefully you'll join us. You'll see the work of Harbor Springs artist Raymond Gaynor hovering over my shoulder, so you get a little sneak peek of what's to come. Thanks again for joining us for this virtual coffee at 10. Today we are in conversation with writer Cody Walker. Cody Walker recently completed a residency at Good Hart Artist Residency in Good Hart, Michigan. And he is also the co-director of the Bear River Writers Conference. So he has connections up to our part of the state here. So we're really excited to hear about those projects. But Cody also teaches English and directs the undergraduate program in creative writing at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. And he's the author of 2 full-length poetry collections and has been the recipient of numerous awards. And if you will feed some links into the chat, but if you even just Google Cody Walker writer, you will come across all sorts of poems, and we'll get to hear a little bit today as well. So please join me with a virtual welcome to our guest today, Cody Walker.
Thanks. Yeah, it's really nice to be here. Hi.
Great. Okay, so I'm gonna start us off in our conversation here. Cody was introduced to me via the Good Hart Artist Residency, and that is directed by Sue and Bill Kelso. So if Sue and Bill, if you're joining us on either platform, hey there, thanks for the wonderful work that you do. We weren't able to align Cody's visit with that residency, but we were really excited about his work. So I'm wondering, Cody, if to get us started in our conversation, you can just tell us a little bit about your experience with that artist in residence program and what you were working on.
Yeah, absolutely. My experience was amazing, which I said about 700 gazillion times during my 2 weeks there. I'm sure Sue and Bill got tired of me just gushing, but every time I saw them, I was like, thank you so much. Thank you so much. I can't believe this gift. Yeah, I was there writing poems, more working on a manuscript than writing new poems. So I was doing a lot of shuffling of pieces and, kind of literally just covering every available space, couches, desks, floors, beds, with pages of poems that that I've written over the past decade plus. And it's just so, I mean, I'm right now, I'm working with honor students in creative writing at University of Michigan, and they're putting together manuscripts. And I keep going back to my time at Good Hart, which was the very end of January, beginning of February. And I'm literally pulling up, I mean, I can show you guys in a moment, but pulling up photos I took of my space there and just saying, you've got to, it's so helpful to have these poems, or in some cases there's stories with my students, but just something out physically that you can move around and you can read it from top of the floor space to bottom and see what's working together, what kinds of poems play well together, which ones need to be separated a little bit more. I just think that's so incredibly helpful. So one of my, for me, one of the gifts was just having space, because time obviously, but also the physical space to spread out. I have two kids, they're 7 and 10, they move around, they take up their own space. So just to have all of that room to play with my poems. And I came away, a week and a half into the residency with a new manuscript, which was really exciting for me.
Great. I want to pause there then and just talk a little bit about your process. So I'm not a writer, I must confess, but what you're describing is so tactile, and it's interesting, that idea of taking these pieces and assembling something new. So can you tell me just a little bit about that? Like how do you, okay, we'll get into how you write a poem, right? But we'll acknowledge that you've written poems and now you're thinking about how they exist collectively. Just, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So for me, it's a little bit like this new project it's more complicated than maybe in the past, when I've written more slowly and I've had poems that I thought were, maybe manuscript worthy, poems I'd spend more time on. What I did over, I guess I have to call them the Trump years, although that kind of hurts my soul a little bit to do that. But from the beginning of 2015 to the beginning of 2020, I wrote a poem every day, and I just really kind of committed to that. And so I I did the math at one point. It was 1,826 poems. So I just had a lot, and most of them were, of course, not the least bit good. But I just every day I wrote something, and I sent it off on a private, through a private website to 8 friends. So I was kind of obligated to, speak up each day, or often each night, midnight, trying to get my poem in. And so I had all these poems that I hadn't taken any time to really go back to, because I was always on to the next thing. They were mostly very short. They were more than not politically driven. I was just kind of taking up the news of the day, because that was the easiest way to just quickly say, okay, new cabinet secretary, write a poem about this person, and just kind of keep going like that. And so I just, I just had a stack of pages, and but hadn't taken the time to do anything with them. And so having the time at Good Hart to see which small pieces might go together to make larger pieces, and that would be part of the manuscript, and also just as kind of triple check, okay, this poem is not good, I don't have to think about this poem anymore, and just put that away, and finally just cull the herd of the 1826 down to a 60-page manuscript. That's what I was doing, and I was doing it again in a tactile way. Yeah, I'll show you eventually, but just all the pages that were stacked up and spread out and moving around. And I even brought, maybe motivated by my kids who do a lot of arts and crafts projects, but I brought scissors and Scotch tape and things like that, where I was gonna, instead of the copying and pasting we do on a screen, just literally, cutting and taping and moving around. And it was really
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah, I recommend it.
Cody, why don't you go ahead and share that? I think we might as well look at it while we're talking it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll share two things. I'm not quite sure I know how to do both at once. So I'll share the first one, which is the upstairs of the Good Hart Artist Residency. I assume it does not look like this at the moment, but can everybody see that? Is that showing up on the share screen?
I can. If anyone's having complications, just let us know, okay?
Okay, so the residence, for those who don't know about it, it's so beautiful. It's this the downstairs has these windows that I don't know how, I'm not good at judging, but they seem like they're about 700 feet high, and let in all this light. You're a block from the lake, trees everywhere, birds everywhere, lovely quiet, dark bedroom on the ground floor. I slept 8 hours one night. I haven't slept 8 hours since I was 4 years old. Just so this marvelous downstairs where you can move around, and then there's an upstairs study which we're looking at here, and it's, you know, it's smaller, and there's a couch and a desk, and so I use this space, and then eventually the downstairs space as well, just to again have all of these poems. And as you can maybe kind of see, a lot of these poems are really short, so I'm, you know, again trying to look for ways to combine them. Are there, you know, 5 poems that are similar enough that I can combine them into a little, you know, quintet of some sort? So that's what I was spending a lot of time doing. Just, you know, I'd go to sleep, and then I'd come up in the morning and I'd look at them after my, at least one time, 8 hours sleep, with fresh eyes, and say, oh wait, no, that poem right in the middle is messing up something that happens 4 poems later, and I can see that, you know, all at once, where I can't see it. I can't see it so well if I'm just scrolling down on a screen, on a document on a screen. So that's, you know, so again, just literally moving things and moving things, and then just to pick up on the point of how many poems I decided I was done with, I'm gonna stop this share for a moment and then go back, try again. This, and I'll add that my, it's not, is it coming up? Are you seeing the recycling bin there?
Yes,
Yeah.
we are.
Okay, so there's my, they're the poems that I decided I was done with. And there's a quote by the Polish poet and Nobel laureate, Wisława Szymborska, where she's asked why she wrote so few poems over a 50 or 60-year career. She has a kind of a small, you know, her collective work is not all that big, yet it's great, and she won the Nobel Prize and all of that. And so somebody asked her why she hadn't written so many poems, and she said, I have a wastebasket. So I thought about that in terms of this, and I got out Sue and Bill's Recycling, and these are all the poems that I'd written over the past decade that and some of these are, I think, probably duplicates, but just ones that I thought I did not need to lug around with me anymore. And then I sent this to my partner, the fiction writer Polly Rosenwake, and she sent this note of alarm. Not that I was throwing away my poems, but that I was throwing away potentially really valuable scrap paper. And she said, "My God, don't do that. Bring that home. We'll flip it over. The kids will, you know, draw. Do not throw these away." So I did not end up recycling all this, but I did, you know, kind of emotionally decide that, okay, these I'm done with, and maybe these that you see still on the table behind it are the ones that I'm still thinking about. So yeah, again, just having the space, having the time, and also just, you know, the gift of the residence was, I mean, it was really multiple. It was, you know, the time is maybe the most obvious thing. The space is, to me, almost as obvious, and then also a little bit just the obligation that here I am, I'm the writer in residence, I better do something, I better not waste my time. So I, you know, I really didn't look at anything online. I mean, almost anything. I kind of changed all my teaching duties for the semester so that I would have those 2 weeks clear. And I was almost out of cell phone range anyway, so I barely talked to anybody. And I really just did spend, you know, just about 2 weeks with those poems. And it was just a gift I hadn't had in a dozen years and may not have again for a while.
That's wonderful. I'm really loving hearing about that creative process, because I like how similar it is to a visual art creative practice in a way, you know. And I was thinking about that as we were going to enter this conversation, you know, with my background in visual arts as opposed to writing, but I love seeing this overlap. And there's something about the way that you're producing. I mean, we know as makers, we're we're juggling all these things, right? We need that creative time. You're also a teacher, you know, you're committed and engaged with your students, and that's creative in its own way. But you need that impetus and that time and that space to create. So two things you just mentioned in the residency, that of course that was time and space for you to be able to really focus and do that. But I'm a little bit curious about your year with your small private group where you felt obligated to produce a poem for, you know, every day. What was the commitment there, and how did you guys start that, and how important was it?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it was incredibly important. So it was January 1st of 2015, and I lived in Seattle for a bunch of years, about a dozen years before I moved east and then Midwest in 2009. And so a lot of my closest writing friends are still in Seattle, or at least they're folks from what I think of as the Seattle diaspora of my time there in the late 90s and aughts. And so we have a private website that, you know, stuff that you can't Google, so it's not published if we put anything up there, but it's just stuff we can look at, and we don't even really, you know, workshop it or offer critiques of any sort. It's really just to kind of share work and to kind of keep us going. And we just, you know, would post things sporadically. And so some of the folks in Seattle had an idea on January 1st or leading up to January 1st of 2015, let's post, everyone has I think there were 8 people at the time, everyone posts something every day for January. And if we all do it, we go out to those in Seattle anyway, go out to this fabulous dinner at the end of it and celebrate. And if one person messes it up, one person misses a day, the whole thing is canceled, and you carry that guilt and shame with you.
Shame is a great motivator.
It is. And I think we were in Mexico at the time, and kind of crazy I've spent so much of my life in my basement recently. It's weird to imagine traveling, but I was in Mexico. I, you know, wasn't all that busy for a few days. I said, yeah, I'm going to get in on this, and started doing it and kept doing it. And we all made it to the end of the month. And then I just liked it so much that I kept doing it. I thought, well, I'll do it again for another month. And nobody else did. They would again chime in sporadically, but I just kept going. And then I thought, well, I've done it 2 months, I'll do it 3. And then I kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And finally it was the end of the year, end of 2015. And now we're into the kind of the real election, you know, the 2016 election cycle. And I'm writing a lot about politics. I'm writing about the rise of Trump. I'm writing about just, you know, things I probably would have been more active as a poet anyway. And I write because I write about politics. So those, you know, even years of 2008 and 2012 and 2016 kind of get me motivated. I just thought, well, keep going. And then I did it for another year, and then another year, and another year. And I did it so for 5 straight years, never missing a day. And then at the end of it, I just felt kind of exhausted, and also felt that it had become kind of a gimmick, and probably exhausting to my friends who were getting, you know, what essentially probably felt like spam emails every morning from me. And I just needed to kind of pull back and, you know, look back on what I had done, take a breath, maybe try to write some nonfiction, fiction, which I didn't end up doing much of, but just kind of imagine that I needed to shift gears a little bit, and just take a breather. And but I didn't, you know, then 2 months later, 3 months later, the pandemic hit, and that, you know, kind of had its own set of problems. Suddenly the kids were home and whatnot. And so I didn't take the time that in 2020 that I thought I was going to finally take that breath and put this manuscript together, and, you know, or, you know, at least think about it. So I didn't have a chance to do it until a year later. I mean, almost exactly a year later, coming into Good Hart. And so that was my, you know, again, this gift that I didn't expect. I didn't, you know, because of the pandemic, Good Hart wasn't open. I mean, the town was open, but the residency wasn't open for much of 2020. And so it was kind of a surprise to when Sue emailed me and said, can you come at the end of January? And I thought, I think I can. And, you know, just kind of to light up like that, and then to have it be as, you know, sort of wonderfully productive as it was. And also just restorative. I mean, just to kind of take a breath after what was such a stressful year for all the obvious reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a couple of little nuggets in what you shared with us just there will allow me to segue nicely into talking about just your writing in general. I think it would be nice to know a little bit about how you got started writing, and what drew you to poetry specifically? And I guess I should acknowledge, I have to confess that I wasn't really fully aware that April happens to be poetry month. So here we are. So that's
Yeah, it is, right. Yeah, April. Because, and the reason is kind of funny. It's from T.S. Eliot. April is the cruelest month. As the wasteland begins. So this, the cruel month is what is also the poetry month. And I mean, poets kind of debate whether or not, should there be a poetry month? And is that kind of, does that mean that there are 11 months where we don't have to worry about poetry? Thank God. I don't, who cares?
That's how I feel about all those months too.
Yeah. I think it's fine if it draws people's attention to poetry a little bit, whose attention would not otherwise be drawn to poetry. That's great. So yeah, we're in Poetry Month. We're having more readings that are poetry readings at virtual ones, unfortunately, but at the bookstores in Ann Arbor, Literati and Nicholas that host readings. Yeah, I think it's fine. So yeah, how did how did I get started writing poetry? I've been, full disclosure to people joining, Liz sent me a few possible questions early. This was one of them. And so I thought about it a little bit, but I kept coming back to my 7-year-old daughter who is writing poems now. And I don't remember myself at 7 all that well, but I'm watching her write poems and get excited about them and want to share them. And then she's also writing, books that she's, illustrating, also illuminated texts, things like that. And to watch her do that that's when you asked me how did I get started, I'm not sure exactly, except that I think I probably felt a little bit like my daughter Ani feels now, that you said maker before. It's fun to make something. I mean, the Greek word for poet is maker, and it's I think, like my young daughter at the moment anyway, I liked being a maker. That was exciting. That made my eyes go a little wider if I was in the process of making something. If I'm just, kind of, much of my life I'm kind of going like this because I'm so tired, or I'm going like this. But when I'm writing, I'm not doing that. When I'm writing, I'm kind of, I'm real awake over whether or not this line needs a comma. Just the smallest thing will get my attention. And I think that was, probably somewhat true from a relatively early age. And again, I'm seeing this in my daughter now, and just that idea of it's fun to make something. It's fun to be in the process of it, and then it's fun to have made something, and then you can show it to somebody. So I don't know who I would have shown it to back then, but these days, if I write something, I'm the kind of person who doesn't kind of keep it to himself. 5 seconds later, I'm showing it to my partner, or I'm posting it on this private website I mentioned so my friends in Seattle can see it, or I'm immediately sending it out to one of these websites that popped up during the Trump years that deal with political poetry of the day, and they want stuff that was written 10 seconds ago. And so yeah, I'm eager to share immediately and just feel some kind of pleasure in having made something. And I I don't know why poetry. I liked to make other things as well when I was younger, but I just kept coming back to liking the sounds of words kind of bumping up against each other. I like words that, in context anyway, make some noise. I like rhyme. I like meter more than a lot of contemporary poets or poets my age. I like clang and bang. I like weird little sonic surprises, and unlike other arts that I was never all that good at, I poetry was the one thing that, at least whether I was good at it or not, I kept coming back to it. I stopped playing guitar. I'd stopped trying to act. I stopped doing photography in any real way, but I kept coming back to poetry.
So did you just study writing in English right out of school and just follow that path?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I have kind of a boring pathway to, my job here directing the undergraduate creative writing program, in that I was in college. I was at the University of Wisconsin most of my college years, and I was studying under somebody who was the director of undergraduate creative writing there, and whom I loved. And I did a creative thesis with him and wrote it. It was half poetry and half fiction. And then I went on and did an MFA in poetry, but was still writing fiction at the time. And then I did a PhD, but even though it was a lit PhD, I was still kind of hanging out with the MFA crowd. And so I had a kind of a natural, not especially, weird or surprising progression to teaching creative writing. And I've wound up doing something real similar to what my mentor was doing, 30 3 years ago with me in Madison. I was talking to an MFA student here at Michigan a few days ago, and he was talking about his pathway. And so he's, this is an incredibly difficult program to get into here. We get 1,000 applicants for 20 spots each year. And so he's here doing an MFA in poetry, and I asked him how he came to it. And he said that he had been a janitor at a library that had a coffee shop, and the barista was always talking poetry with this guy from San Francisco who was a poet also, and he'd kind of overhear the conversations as he was cleaning up, and then he started getting in on the conversations. And then this poet from San Francisco, whose name I didn't recognize and can't remember, started kind of mentoring him, and then he applied for this program and got in. I thought that's an epic, that's a fantastic story. That's so much better than mine. Mine's just kind of, connecting the dots. So there you go.
Predictable pathways are nice too.
Well, sometimes.
Hey, would this be a nice opportunity to segue and you can share some of your writing with our attendees?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I have to confess, I forget what our time, are we doing is this a half an hour, an hour? What are we doing?
It's an hour. You still have 30 minutes to go. Are you good?
Yeah, no, I just maybe we're at the end. Maybe we got a lot of time. I can't remember. But yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Would it be, so I pulled up some poems from this new manuscript that I thought might, I don't know, we talked a little bit over email about political poetry. I was thinking about you all being artists, and I've just a few poems that touch on art. And I've also been thinking about, so what I was on a panel a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about kind of poetry and grief, and my poetry is not generally grief driven. I talk more about poetry and civic things and sometimes serio-comic stuff more than not, but I have been writing more about my mother's Alzheimer's recently, and that has a place in the manuscript. So I pulled up some poems about my mother. I pulled up a few political poems, and I pulled up a few kind of poems that touch on art in one way or another. So I'm happy to read any of those. I'm happy to pull them up if it'd be helpful to have people see them on the screen. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it would be great if you wanted to pull them up on the screen so those of us who are visual can follow along. And yeah, really, I think just sharing something for those of us or those of our attendees who aren't familiar with your work at all, to get a snippet of that sense of rhythm and your voice, and then we'll dig into some of the content there.
Okay, sure. Well, let me see if I can share the screen again.
Any or all of what you suggested, I think, is welcome.
Okay, great. So this, are you seeing the poems up now?
Yes, Poor
okay.
Devil. We see.
Yeah. Okay. So this is the manuscript. I thought so this is Poor Devil comes. This is the tentative title for the manuscript, and the manuscript's still, it's not finished, but it's in some kind of shape right now. And so the title comes from Charles Baudelaire's On the Essence of Laughter, which is an essay that I love and that's been important to me. I wrote my PhD dissertation on comic theory and comic strategies, mostly relating to poetry. And so Baudelaire in that essay talks about why do we laugh when somebody falls down, when somebody slips on the ice, and it relates to this, this idea of you laugh out of a sense of superiority. Haha, you've fallen down, I'm still standing up. That's along with incongruity and relief. That's one of the three classic theories about why people laugh. It's the meanest of the three. So he says in that essay, the poor devil has disfigured himself at the very least. He may even have broken an essential member, which I find funny and is I think the epigraph for the collection. I didn't realize this till this morning when I get Word a Day, a little kind of thing in my email box every morning that has an interesting word in it, and it always has a quote at the bottom, and it's often related to a birthday. And today is Charles Baudelaire's birthday, so happy birthday, Baudelaire, which I think is how lucky. And I guess I should say, if I'm going to read any poems about my mother, tomorrow is my mother's birthday, so we're kind of got birthdays galore. But I'll tell you, I'll read the first poem of this manuscript just because it says something about my process, for what it's worth, that it's often just it's a tiny rhyme that gets me going, and it's why I write about new political figures a lot, because you'll have somebody who drops into the scene who you haven't heard of, and it's just a name that I can rhyme off of that name. Or I like tennis, so if there's a new tennis player who suddenly is on the scene, Zverev or somebody like that, can I rhyme that? And so I had a lot of neck pain, and I started taking gabapentin a few years ago, and I thought, gabapentin, what does that rhyme with? How about went in? And that becomes the trigger for the poem, and the rest of it I'm not planning to write until I get into it with just that little nugget of the rhyme intro. So this poem goes like this. The title is also part of the first line. When the gabapentin went into my system, I thought of Joey Ramone, Gabba Gabba Hey, and how he drifted away, tired and alone. I missed him. But what I really missed was myself at 17. I missed that heady buzz that's now nerve pain at 51. How in love I was with everyone. And so again, just gabapentin and went in is the entry point. I system and missed him appeal to me, and then I'd start to just kind of go from there and see what else I can connect along the way. So it's a poem that heavily rhymes. It's not metrical at all, but it's just kind of trying to have little sonic echoes down the way, and hopefully make someone go, huh, at the end, I guess, or something. But who knows? Who knows? And then I'll read one that's slightly longer. And this is one I like form, and I often will use kind of forms that are more kind of comic forms, or forms you might run across in elementary school. So here's a poem that's just a series of haiku. These are all 575 stanzas.
Cody, I'm going to pause you before you get started.
Uh-huh.
We have one of our attendees is wondering if they could see that text a little larger. So
I'm sorry. Yeah. Let me see if I can do that. Is that?
I think
if you go to view.
Oh, okay. Okay. And what am I doing? Zoom?
Zoom. Let's see if that helps.
How's that? Did that work?
Yeah, let's see. Anne, is that better for you? Comment in the chat for us, okay? Better. Okay.
Better? Okay. So this next one is a series of haiku, and it's political. I wrote it I think the day that Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell, and it uses found text from Trump about Epstein, which I think people will recognize. I was up in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley when this happened, and when I wrote this poem. And this is one that I wrote kind of immediately after it happened, and then sent off, to a political poetry website called Poets Respond, I believe, immediately, just kind of, trying to engage with the moment. It's called Jeffrey Enjoys His Social Life, which is what Trump said about Epstein. Jeffrey enjoys his social life, or American funk. 1, who'da thunk? Today we saw a white deer, odds 1 in 30,000, and also cows and Jeffrey Epstein memes and a broken Buddha. Junk is what this country loves. Junk and shotguns, white beer and whiter gods, plus blameless distraction, Epstein on my screen, and streams of actual blood. 2, it's night here now in the Hudson Valley. Clouds swim low. A life of so-called sober virtue doesn't preclude a drunk farewell. Take it from Trump. Jeff was a good hang. Terrific guy. He's a lot of fun to be with. It's even said that he likes beautiful women as much as I do. 3, here's how to tell a joke. Weave in a bit of wordplay. Include a monk. Say, I've got your fill in the blank right here, mister. Then shame the laugher. Shame the whole half-gone country. Fetishists of mud, of manacles, of misremembered might. Shame them, shame us all. In sum, not a fan. So that's me in my kind of dark afternoon of the soul, and thinking too much about Trump and stuff that came to a head on January 6th, etc. Sort of stuff. And I've got a lot of poems that sort of do that, and maybe too many. So I was trying to sort of decide which of those poems would find a place in this manuscript, and which I can just kind of consign to the dustbin. So I could read others, or we could pause there, whatever you want to do.
Well, I have some questions, and then
Yeah.
if you want to hear more, I mean, I'm very much enjoying the reading, so we'll see if we can fit some more in. But a couple of questions, I guess. I'm drawn to three things specifically that I would love to hear you talk about more, and you can pick which one, okay? I would love to hear you talk more about your interest in rhyme. I would love to hear you talk more about your interest in humor, particularly with these dark and heavy subjects. And I'd also love to hear you talk about why you use poetry to deal with social and or political content and commentary. Where do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, the first two, I could talk about the first two in relationship to this next poem that's here, because I I've been writing in this forum called the Mad Gardener's Song Stanza a lot over the past decade, and it's a form that Lewis Carroll invented. So it's a rhyme-heavy form. It's metrical, unlike those last two poems that I just mentioned. And so everyone knows Lewis Carroll as the author of Alice in Wonderland. A lot of people probably know the poem Jabberwocky, maybe a few other poems as well. These Mad Gardener songs that he wrote are less well known. They always go, he thought he saw a blah blah blah, that blah 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 blah. He looked again and found it was a blah 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 blah. He said blah 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 blah. And so you fill in the blahs, and that makes the poem. And so he wrote these in they show up in these two books that he wrote late in his career called Sylvie and Bruno and Sylvie and Bruno Concluded. And they're not popular books. They're not very good books. They're weird to read after, loving the Alice books. They're more kind of didactic and not as fun, but they have scattered throughout them these amazing 9 stanzas. The last one is my favorite. I think I can do it from memory. It goes, he thought he saw an argument that proved he was the Pope. He looked again and found it was a bar of mottled soap. A fact so dread, he faintly said, extinguishes all hope. So they all go, he thinks he sees one thing, and then what he actually sees is about as far removed from that first thing as possible. And then he tries to tie it together in some form. So I love the challenge of that form. I love how rhyme heavy it is with the, kind of the 3 rhymes in each stanza. And his poems are more funny than not. So what I've done with that form is to try to make them less funny, which seems like a stupid thing to do, but just to try to, address more serious topics within that kind of context of this. It sounds like we're having a good time, but maybe we're not. And I like that friction or frisson or whatever, however you want to imagine that contrast. So maybe I'll just read this poem as an example of it. So this is a Mad Gardener's Bouquet. So 3 of these stanzas tied together. He thought he saw an angry baby grind a bug to dust. He looked again and found it was the Tin Man gone to rust. The autumn wind, you felt it, right? Just then, a little gust. He thought he saw a bank of clouds that hadn't any money. He looked again and found it was a dead clown. That's not funny. You bring this on yourself, she said. Just try to calm down, honey. He thought he saw a taco truck on blocks near exit 10. He looked again and found it was his death day. Who knows when? It's just a thing I think about every now and then. So I've written hundreds of these, and too often I think they end kind of like this one ends, where it's just like they all end with, oh God, we're all going to die. And you can only do that so many times, but that's the sort of the comedy of what sounds like comedy, and then what I'm actually thinking about, or what I want to sort of use to counterbalance that comedy, is one of the things that I'm definitely drawn to, probably too drawn to, which is why I had that giant stack of pages that were about to tip into the recycling container. And and then maybe just to add on to why do this with politics. I just think it's so difficult. When I'm writing about politics, I'm almost entirely, preaching to a choir. Nobody reads my poetry who who doesn't fully agree with my critique of, usually anyway, of whatever sort of egregious thing is happening in the news. But the only way I can think of to kind of give it a little bit of make it memorable and separated from kind of what so many of us were feeling during those years, and those years I put in quotes because there's always something that you feel that way about. is to use satire and to make it funny and to find some kind of sideways entry point into the critique. So it's not just me saying, "Oh my God, do you believe what he just said?" or like that. We've all done that in various ways. So this is my kind of I don't know about backdoor, but kind of side door entrance point into that kind of discussion. Not this poem in particular, but a lot of poems that take up politics in that way.
I think I hear you completely that the audience for these poems is likely of a shared mindset, but I'll tell you, I think our crew today is probably varied. And so I think it's interesting to think about using poetry to talk about these topics. But then also the poem, at least you shared with us, is about a very specific pairing and a piece of history, but it's also about broader ideas of American culture, right? So I don't know, what do you think about that in sharing these poems with a mixed audience? And is there something you're hoping for the reader or listener to walk away with, or what do you think?
I mean, maybe you mentioned that I have a couple of kind of regular kind of full-length books that look like this. So this is the first one, Shuffle and Breakdown, and there's a guy falling off a bicycle on it. So it could be worse, but not great, right? The second one, I've got two skeletons fighting over a pickled herring. So things are getting a little bit worse and worse. And then the last book, which is not a full-length book, it's a chapbook. Worst of all, has Trump's orange small hand kind of pointed up like that from a screen grab that my publisher made. And so this book came out almost immediately after Trump's election. It came out on the 100th day of his presidency. We tried to get it out on January 20th, but we just didn't have time to do it. But I was reading poems. So this book came out immediately after this book. And so I was kind of, I hesitate to say I was touring because it was hardly anything like that, but I was occasionally traveling someplace to give a reading in 2016, which is when this book came out. But already I didn't want to read from these poems. I wanted to read the new poems about what I thought was going to be, the rise and quick fall of Trump, because I was reading these poems in, September and October of 2016. But I was, I thought jokingly, at these bookstores full of, liberal poetry fans saying, if there is even one of you who's thinking about voting for Trump, please do not. And, so I was, gesturing towards that, but I wasn't taking it all that seriously. And then, I remember doing it in Baltimore in a really kind of exaggerated performative way, and just I know one of you, you're not going to vote, you have to vote, but again, it was more of a joke than not. And then 3 weeks later, it was early November, and look what happened. So yeah, I don't have any, I think, illusions or delusions that much of what I say matters in a substantive way, but if I can, kind of rally somebody a tiny bit, I'm happy to do it. I did nothing. It feels like I didn't, I guess I was raising two kids and teaching and whatnot, but I feel like I did nothing in 2015 and 2016 than write political poems and political essays. I was writing for the Kenyon Review, and I was writing weekly, or at least every other weekly blog posts for them that were always about politics, and always trying to, kind of point out the absurdities of, again, what felt to me the absurdity of Trump's rise during that time. And I don't imagine it made any difference, but I also can't imagine not having done it, because the opposite of trying is just not trying, and I didn't want to not try.
Do you see this work as activist in any way, or is it more personal than that?
It felt to me activist at the moment. And again, so this is from, say, mid 2015 to early 2017 or something, which is when these poems were all written. And again, a lot of essays for the Kenyon Review. I guess I felt some kind of weird obligation to chime in every, few days as best I could. And again, I do not think what I did made any difference, but it, if nothing else, it set an example to me, maybe to my kids someday, maybe to the people closest to me. But I don't, yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that, yes, I think it mattered. I really don't, but it mattered to me. So, yeah, so that's what I mean, and that's just what I was thinking about. So in some ways it became my material. And if I had the idea that I want to write, I want to write an essay, I want to write a poem, then I've got to write about something. And so it's not the only thing I was writing about, I suppose, during that time, but it was the predominant thing. Um, Lately, I've been writing, as I said, more about my mother and more about some other things, which has felt good to, kind of say, okay, I think Joe and Kamala have this. I can turn my attention to something else for a moment. Yeah, I was pretty consumed by it in the late part of the election cycle and the first couple of years anyway of the Trump administration.
Sorry, I had to find my microphone. So I'm going to pause here for a second and just let you guys know that we're about 15 minutes out. So if you have questions for Cody, please feed them into the chat and the Q&A. And then as those questions come in, I'm wondering, Cody, if you would share, you had mentioned that you did, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, you did have one of the newer poems from this series dealing with Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to share that?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go back to the shared screen.
And as you do that, I'm going to share this comment from one of our attendees. Thank you, Anne. She says, I might not agree with you on Trump, but the poem was insightful in terms of our culture and who produces these leaders. And yeah, I thanks. I think that that's what I read too, is that it's a snapshot of bigger picture stuff, right? That's happening in America. Cody, do you want to talk about that at all?
Well, yeah, I want to thank Anne for that comment, because I believe me, so I lived in Seattle for a bunch of years, and I've lived in Ann Arbor with very quick detours a couple of other places for the last dozen years. I very much live in a liberal bubble where I'm and I sometimes forget, as you said, that I'm used to reading in front of an audience where everyone is voting the exact same way, everyone is kind of nodding at the same beats within poems, and it's good to get myself out of that. It's actually a conversation I had with Sue and Bill when I was up in Good Hart, and so thank you, Anne, for that reminder and that comment. Let me scroll down to okay. So I wrote here's a last impeachment poem. I'll go to these Alzheimer's poems. So as I said, my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's about a decade ago, and so I've been writing off and on about that. Her birthday is tomorrow. She'll be 81, and I went out. I've been very kind of low risk during the pandemic, but I did go out to see her in Seattle around Halloween because she was having some difficulties, but I haven't seen her since then. And but I've been writing, talking to her on the phone, I guess, obviously, but also writing about her from time to time. And so maybe I'll just read a couple of these short ones that have to do with that passage. This is again using that same form, but again, not this comic form for not comic ends. Mad cognitive decline. 1. She thought she saw a rhododendron, augury of danger. She looked again and found it was her shadow. I can change her. I'll bring her cups of tea so she won't see me as a stranger. 2. He thought he saw a Mother's Day on Sunday, like before. He looked again and found it was an open cellar door. Perhaps it leads to moments we won't speak of anymore. So again, I hope that poem is not the least bit funny, but it's using this comic form to contain ideas that aren't funny. I'll just jump over to this quick one as well, because this is again one of these poems where just a rhyme gets me into it. So I'm watching the NBA playoffs last September with the Boston Celtics and Miami Heat, and Jason Tatum on the Celtics. I think, can I rhyme off Tatum? How about Hatem? And I'm not thinking I'm about to write about my mom, but that's the first line. Jason Tatum, I don't hate him. Why is that a poem? Who knows why? And then I think of another play, Bam Adebayo. I think that rhymes with Ohio. And then I'm into a poem that I don't expect to be into, and one that quotes Lewis Carroll, by the way, from the Duchess from Alice, who yells at Alice, "You don't know much, and that's a fact." So that's enough prelude for this poem, but it's called September. Jason Tatum, I don't hate him, nor do I hate Bam Adebayo. My mother, stay with me, is from Ohio. She doesn't follow basketball. She doesn't follow much, and that's a fact, says the Duchess. Jimmy Butler once more touches. The heat fall. It's my mom's last fall, maybe. She once held me like a baby. This poem's been hacked. So again, a poem that I begin just riffing on basketball and I wind up at a really different place. And that's for me the most fun way to experience a poem that I'm writing, is just to completely surprise myself. Robert Frost said at one point in a letter, I think it's from a letter, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. So I want a poem that kind of catches me in the act of surprise, and then I can hopefully convey that in some small way.
Well, thank you for sharing that poem. I love how it just feels like a snapshot of the brain. I love the way that, you know, you move from thought to thought.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's a lovely way to process. I've really resonated with your poems, everything. I just want you to keep reading. I'm just going to be honest, but it's such a healthy way to, in my opinion, to process. And oh yeah, I'm loving it. So, and the other thing that I wanted to comment on is I did some research before we started, and your poetry style is in the sense of a design element, you know, the patterns that you are sometimes purposely trying to have in there. And I, you know, because I'm a visual artist, I was a little worried, you know, how you know, am I going to be able to engage with you? But I did feel, like Liz has mentioned, a comfort in seeing something similar to a visual artist in your process and the design aspect. So I've enjoyed this very much.
Thanks. You know, that makes me think, I was thinking about y'all being visual artists, and I'm teaching a class in the fall coming up at the University of Michigan that's going to engage with the Museum of Art there with Uma, and we're going to do things that we're going to do ekphrastic poetry, which for people who don't know is poetry that engages with the arts, often the visual arts, I guess not always, but usually. And I'm not somebody who has written a ton of ekphrastic poetry, but I have written a little bit. So I pulled up one from this new manuscript that is a poem that engages with a piece by the artist Georges Roux that's at the Detroit Institute of Art. And I could pull that up if you would like me to. It's again one of these poems that, like, I have too many of, that just ends up with, oh, everyone's going to die, but gets us there through the Roux.
You know, you made that comment, but I'm finding your poetry, it's life, but it also makes me want to make darn sure that I'm taking advantage of every single day that I'm here. So I see it as a reminder to live life to the fullest.
That makes me really happy. You know, if I can, then why don't could I read two poems then? I'll read the one that is the "We're all going to die" according to Georges Roux the clown, and then I'll read the last poem of the manuscript, which is kind of, I think, what you're talking about. And God knows I don't always do it, but it is a more hopeful poem. So it maybe will show a little bit of arc within the manuscript. So let me yet again see if I can successfully share the screen. I'm always afraid I'm going to do this wrong and just end the meeting or something.
That won't happen. You're okay.
Okay. So here's it's Georges Roux the clown, and this is I think I'd taken my partner to the airport and just decided to keep driving and go into Detroit and spend some time in the galleries, and I got really struck by this particular painting, and just felt like I was also about to teach a class on clowns at U of M, and so I was drawn to this, you know, picture of a clown, but just felt like his eye was, it was one of those things where wherever I moved, he was still sort of looking at me. So I just wrote this poem on a napkin in the cafe afterwards. It's very short. The Clown, circa 1907, by Georges Roux. This unbidden clown, this midlife schmuck, this down on his luck, oil and gouache on panel slob, has a single job: tell gallery goers they're going to die. He does it with his one good eye. So there's a poem that to me is a very familiar poem, a poem I've written versions of a million times, but I don't usually get the visual accompaniment like this. So it's kind of fun to have that there. And then if I scroll to, this is not the whole manuscript in front of me, but there's some of the poems I thought that might make sense to look at. And this is the last poem in the current version of the manuscript, and it kind of bookends the first poem, which starts with me at 51. So this is me at 52. I'm now 54. And it riffs on Dylan Thomas's poem in October. So his birthday's in October, mine's in January. I actually showed up at Good Hart the day after my birthday this year. So there's some lines that are similar to Thomas here. And again, this is a poem that is written in haiku stanzas. So that's the constraint. Poem in January after Dylan Thomas. It was my 52nd year to heaven, and I rose wintry, the mystery of my self following me from mirror to window pane. Still alive, I thought to shout, but the woods, the river, the sea were dreaming their dreams, and my children too, and the deer and the singing birds I'd see days later if I could lean into the gears of this new life. So that's, I think, the landing point for this new book, although I'm not 100% sure.
What, because obviously I've never written a manuscript, what is this process? When do you think it will be published?
Wow, that's a great question. The quick and honest answer is I have no idea. So my first 3 books are all with a press that it's called Waywiser. It's a fantastic press. It's based in England and has a kind of a subsidiary office in Maryland as well, through adjacent, I guess, to Johns Hopkins University. And I'm not even sure I should say this on a live stream right now, but I think I'm going to show this manuscript to the folks at Waywiser soonish. I have not yet. And I'm not sure that they're ready for another book from me yet, having published my last full-length one and then this kind of surprise chapbook back to back. They got a lot of Cody Walker books in a hurry there that they didn't expect to, and I mean, God knows they don't sell that well, so they might have other ideas about who they want to. They only publish a few books a year, so I probably shouldn't even be talking about that, but I will perhaps show it to them sometime in the next coming months. And then beyond that, you just kind of try different presses and see who might be interested. And that's my kind of quote unquote home press, but it's certainly not an obvious thing that they're ready for a new manuscript for me. So again, I'm not sure is the answer. There are some poems in the middle of the manuscript that are from those Trump years that again kind of postdate the poems I wrote for this book that seemed still maybe worth something. But the further we get from the setting of those poems, I'm just, if say this book comes out in 2023, does anybody want to read about the Kavanaugh hearings? I don't know. There's always that sense of, is it, are you, Ezra Pound said poetry is news that stays news. And so which of the poems that I've written are really just responses to the news that are maybe semi-interesting in the moment, but that don't hit that higher bar of being news that stays news? And that's the question I'm asking of this manuscript.
I think it'll be relevant even in a couple of years. So
thanks.
We have just a few minutes left. We have a question in the chat that's inquiring where people can find your books if they would like to get one.
I always direct people to local bookstores. If they don't, and the bookstores in Ann Arbor will carry them, but very few other bookstores would have my books on their shelves, but they can always order them. And if you order a book through an independent bookstore, they get the cut. If you order them through Amazon, which you can do as well, Amazon gets the cut, and the press gets almost no money. I mean, they literally get pennies, not dollars, but pennies if you order a book through Amazon. So, I mean, I'm happy, of course, for people to buy my books in whatever way, including Amazon if they must, but I would direct you to independent bookstores first. And there are various ways to do that, but they're all in print, so they can be ordered. Thank you for that question.
Thanks, Cody. And then to wrap us up, I know that you are involved up here with the Bear River Writers Conference. So we only have a couple minutes left, but can you tell our attendees a little bit about that and what's going on for this year?
I can, yeah, and just I'm looking at the chat there. Can you recommend one of the bookstores in just real quickly in Ann Arbor? Literati and Nicola's are the two bookstores that I love and that should be supported for those who care about bookstores in Ann Arbor anyway, and that I know also carry my books. So thank you.
What was the second one? I know
Yeah.
Literati, but I don't know the other one. Can you-
Yeah, Nicola's is kind of the other. It's part of the Schuler group, so that it's connected to a few other bookstores in Michigan, but it's independent ish. And anyway, but yeah, I know we're about running out of time. The Bear River Writers Conference happens this. I'm the co-director with Laura Kaziski, who I'm sure some of you may know is a fabulous poet and fiction writer. So Laura and I run the conference. It used to be run by Keith Taylor, who's a fantastic Michigan poet. Keith kept it going for many years. We're celebrating its 20th anniversary this May, from May 20th to 23rd. We still have, I think, a few open slots if people want to go to the website, bearriver.org, I think is what it is, or you can just Google it. There's a wait list for getting into one of the workshops now. Susan Choi, who won the National Book Award for in fiction in 2019 for Trust Exercise, is our kind of keynote speaker, special guest, going to give a craft talk. We've got great faculty, Antonia Nelson, Victoria Chang, Khalid Matawa, all sorts of, great writers leading workshops. And yeah, it's lots of fun. Usually it's at Camp Michigania on Walloon Lake near Petoskey, but this year it is in my basement. It's on a Zoom screen near you.
Are there sessions that are open to the public?
Yeah, we're going to try to have the evening readings. So we have faculty readings each night. The last one on Saturday is going to be spectacular. It's going to be Antonia Nelson, Victoria Chang, and Susan Choi. And I would think we're going to open those up to the public, maybe have a donation button or something, but I'd like them to be available to everybody. So I'm going to make that happen.
Super. Thank you, Cody. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It really was inspiring, and I can't wait to go dig into your poems even more. I really, really enjoyed it. So thank you very much. And thank you to our attendees joining us on Zoom, and those of you with us on Facebook. We're looking forward to seeing you next time.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Liz, and thank you, Christy, and also just the 700 gazillionth thanks and shout out to Sue and Bill Kelso at Good Hart for making this all happen. I'm full of gratitude. Thanks all.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.